As the supervising sound editor for Beef, Chris Gomez helped shape the series' emotional and sonic landscape, crafting everything from subtle ambient details to moments of gripping tension that deepen the storytelling. And today we're chatting with him about his work on this production. Thank you so much for being here, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
I just want to begin by congratulating you on your Emmy nomination for Beef Season 2. How does it feel to receive that nomination?
It was very surreal. It's my very first nomination, so it was just a whirlwind of emotions and having to go through, the phone calls, the texts, and it was just, getting the chance to go and tell my wife of like, all I said to her was, "Hey, do you want to go to the Emmys?" And she was like, "Oh my God." And she freaked out. So that was just a joy. And my daughter was next to us. And she's like, "Wait, what?" Like she's 8. So she's very much like, "What's going on?" So it was very exciting, but it's been such a joy. And it's been, it's been a lot of fun.
It really just shows you how much incredible work you've put into this series. And like, it's good to be recognized for that. So again, like, congratulations. That is such a cool honor and to kind of cap off what is an incredible show.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it really is. Like, we're so proud of this season and the immense amount of work that went into it. And we couldn't have been more proud of it.
So Beef blends dark comedy, drama, psychological tension in a way that most television shows you don't really see have that kind of the blend the way that this does. How did that unique tone shape your approach to maybe sound for season 2?
Season 2 was very much a blank slate going into it, just because we still wanted it to feel like it was in the realm of season 1, but tonally and just, the story itself was very different from season 1. So we wanted it to be very specific to this season. So it was very much the conversations that we had with Sunny, Lee Sung Jing about our kind of approach to the season had to be very polished, very clean. We wanted it to feel very much we're in these locations like the country club and, Piki Park in Korea. We wanted these locations to just feel very much, that was kind of the direction that we were given. So it's like, how do we approach that? And how do we go about creating this whole thing? So it was very much, how do we build this from the ground up again and make this feel true to the show?
So are there times where you have to like balance like the sound connectivity of season 1 while this is all its own identity while also having its own identity for season 2? Or like, is it just a complete departure?
Thankfully, kind of the thread through both seasons has always been making the show feel grounded in realism. So we never wanted to stray too far from it unless it was absolutely intentional. You would know it. And there are plenty of moments in both seasons where that happens, especially with this season. There's a lot of moments of where we kind of just break that, the whole concept of realism. And, Josh, when he has, takes the Bufo hit and he's just in this world, that's all intentional. But through the entire thing, it was very much, how do we make everything feel real? And thankfully that was kind of the approach going into season 2 as well. And it's that's kind of whatever we do, it has to feel like it belongs in the space. So sonically, we never wanted to stray too far from like, are we pushing it to some extreme limit of where it doesn't feel real anymore? So thankfully, we kind of had that to always, the grounded portion of it always kept us grounded.
Now, would you say that grounded is kind of like the sonic fingerprint of the show, or do you feel like there's another like way that you would define season 2 of Beef sonically?
Season 2 was very much a slow build. Was the kind of the discussion that we talked about a lot, and it was done through through picture editorial through sound of everything. Always had to have this gradual build. And it kicks off even just with the opening of the show. The whole entire cold open, it starts off and it all slowly builds in this tension to that final release of when Josh and Lindsay are arguing and, she's breaking everything. And it's just this culmination of just sound and tension and music is all kind of, pushed us in this direction. And then all of a sudden it's just this like release of like the kids there and he sees them with the phone and it's just like, oh shit. And then it's just this like the audience gets this like kind of breath, the exhale, if you will. And it happens through and through throughout the season. Episode 4, when they're in the hospital, that happens the same way as well. Like, when Ashley kind of goes into this moment and stuff, and we're building, the music's building and everything. She's going back into the surgery. And it's just, again, it's like this just slow build until it finally hits that, we call it the wormhole of when the lights kind of cross over one another and we see this beautiful painting in the image, and then it goes to black. But again, everything before that kind of just swells up. So that was kind of through and through. We kept wanting to do that with different moments. Always wanted to slowly build tension until finally, like, just releasing it from the audience at a very, specific moment.
That's such a gripping psychological way to do it too. Like, you're making them like, sit on the edge of their seat as they're waiting for that moment to have the release, because audiences need that release and to finally give it to them. But to have that slow build, that has to almost be a little bit fun to be like, you're going to take audiences on that ride and they're just going to have to sit through that uncomfortableness as they get to the end.
Yeah. And the fun part about it is it kind of, obviously we know the intention of when it's all going to happen, but the hope is always, as you're watching it, it kind of just creeps up on you. You're sitting there, you're in this moment, something's happening, but then it doesn't automatically just hit you over the head with a hammer. You kind of are slowly dragged into it before you're like, wait a minute, where am I going? And you're all of a sudden, you're along for this ride. You can't back out of it. And then eventually, it drops you out of it at the very end. And you're just like, oh my God, okay. And that happens all throughout, even with like comedic beats, we have to always make sure we hit these like comedic beats throughout the show, because the comedy is very much, it's a tough thing to kind of, on a show like this, Sonny is very intent. He's so good about just interjecting these moments of just the perfect comedic timing. So we want to make sure we get those moments right. Even those it's just little waves that we kind of go through of just like ups and downs throughout these moments.
What I love about that too is that with a series like this, when you finally get that a little bit of comedic relief, it's almost unexpected in a way when it happens. But again, it's like, it's the right moment where you need to like, oh, I have to release a little bit of something here, even if it's just like an awkward laugh or something, to be able to kind of move on with the story without getting almost too, as audience, you don't want them to get too uncomfortable with that.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing is with with the show, it's very, because it can be so tense. There are these just great moments of just like, whether it's a look or our actors were so good at just even delivering a line in a certain way or giving a certain look, it would just kind of help with those moments. And then sonically, we always want to make sure that we're backing those up with just either, making sure the sound doesn't step on those moments, or the sound just kind of helps it, just a little bit, So it was always, it's such a fine line to try to nail those beats.
How do you, like, what is your process for that? Almost deciding like, we're going to let this, like, we're going to let the dialogue or the moment have its moment, or we're going to use the sound to kind of push it a little bit.
A lot of it is conversations that usually happen during, spotting sessions. So I'll sit down with our picture editors and with Sunny and Jake as well, and we'll go through and we'll talk about those moments. So we'll talk about, like, does this need anything sonically to help it out, or do we want to stay clear of it because the joke is in the words that they're doing or maybe the look that they're giving? So we want to make sure we stay clear of that. So it's very much a conversation of like when. And there was, there could be moments of just like, okay, do we try a different sound here? I'm not sure, but let's talk about it first and see what's going to be the right thing for this moment before we actually start just throwing stuff, against the wall. We try to avoid just kind of, just blanket. Let's try everything and then let's see what works. We try to at least have a discussion about what's going to be right for this moment.
That collaborative vision, all working together.
Yes, and collaboration was such a huge thing this season as well. Everybody was always, we were always in discussion with one another. We all spent so much time with each other all through our final mixes of making sure that everybody's ideas were heard, of just let's try this, or what about this, and maybe that sound's not working, or maybe we add a little bit more of this. Hey, I know we kind of went the way that first. During the opening fight sequence, when we first cut into the shot inside of the ADU and Lindsay's just bashing the glass, that was a fun one because it was like, it's loud, but can we push it a little further? Can we make it a little bit more jarring? Like, okay, great. Let's try that and let's see how it works. And everybody was, it's like, that was always that was a lot of fun this season of everybody getting to collaborate and put in their ideas to kind of give us this final product that we had.
And it sounds like that's also a moment kind of like in the production process where sound's not
just like reacting to what's happening, but it's actually influencing the storytelling going on.
Yeah. And it's a lot of fun when that gets to happen. There's, yeah.
Is there a specific like scene where you feel like sound design was like the most important aspect of the storytelling tool beyond just supporting the visuals?
That's a very good question. There's a few moments where I think that happens. Episode 4 is one that comes to mind, with the hospital, where there's so much stuff happening in the background. And if you sit down and you listen to it, and what I loved about it was that every time you sit down and listen to it, you'll pick out something different. You'll notice something different. I'm like, what's that I hear? There's all these very kind of intentional sounds that were placed all over all over that episode. And that was kind of this thing of just the emotion of, we wanted to feel like hell. We wanted to feel like, I need to get out of here. I need to get out of this. By the time you were finally out of the hospital, it's just kind of this like sigh of relief of like, oh my God, thank God it's over. That's one episode that comes to mind. The other one that, like you said, that doesn't just strictly support the visuals, but is kind of, where we use it more as a storytelling aspect is in the final episode, in episode 8, when they're escaping the clinic, and we have this amazing just the one shot of just the fight sequence. Lindsay punches Chairwoman Park, and after after Dr. Kim's incredible speech, and they're running through the hallway, and then we're just in this wonder shot, and they get into this fight with all the Korean guards, and it was one of those things where sonically we didn't want it to feel like a John Wick movie. It's very easy to go that route because we want to just be everything aggressive and, super punchy. But it was one of those things where we actually used sound to dial everybody back so that it felt more like these people don't actually know what they're doing, and they're kind of accidentally falling into this really awesome moment of them fighting their way through these guards of, Ashley runs over and she starts hitting the guy with the mallet. But the mallet sounds so weak because it's very, the idea is like she doesn't have a lot of driving power to it. So it's just very, very kind of like, It was very easy to just make it punchy and hitting him in the chest. But it's like, that's not really what's happening. We don't want her to feel that way, and it's like Lindsay's vomiting just at the right moment when somebody's throwing something. So it's just like all these kind of, it's so well choreographed, but we wanted to make sure that through and through it was, rather than just support the visuals, we wanted to still tell the story of like, they don't really know what they're doing. And this is all on accident. So it should kind of be sloppy and a little bit like messy of they're not really sure they're not professional fighters. They don't do this for a living. They really are just they have fallen into this moment. So how do we kind of make that come to life?
That's such a cool thing to think about. Again, like you said, audiences maybe aren't even cognizant of that, but be able to have all those different moments of like to think about like somebody doesn't have energy, it's sloppy because they're not fighters, like all those pieces that go into making that one scene work from start to finish. I mean, that's such a beautiful way that sound design works in a show such as this.
Yeah, and that scene took a lot of work, because we started off, it was like, do we make everything big and punchy? And then we tried it and we're like, no, it was just like, this isn't feeling right. That's the kind of fun part with sound, is you can have the ability to try these things and take a swing at it and be like, you know what, that's not really the right thing. And then we kind of fell into the, that story aspect of it of like, let's make them feel this way. And then everything kind of started to sit right, and you kind of balancing, all of Andy Lang, who's our sound effects and Foley mixer, did a phenomenal job with just making sure everything was just kind of sitting there. And then Penny Coughlin, who's our dialogue mixer and music mixer, she had to balance the music with everything and the dialogue to make sure that everything's kind of cutting through, and you kind of hear the voices of everybody else a little bit, because the guards too are supposed to feel kind of like confused, like they don't really know what's doing, because this shouldn't happen. This is not supposed. We're supposed to actually be the ones that are winning this fight, and they absolutely are not.
I was gonna say too, it kind of goes to something else I was gonna note, is that there is a lot of like the action is not like as explosive. There's a lot of subtle action, I should say, and there's a lot of use of like silence and ambience and restrained sound. And it sounds like that is something here that is definitely used to build the suspense of the show.
Very much so. We really wanted to make sure that we didn't overcrowd any scene with sound for the sake of having sound. So we wanted to make sure that everything was, if it called for it, And, when we first reach Korea in the beginning of episode 8, it's very big, it's very lush. We want that to feel very intentional, but a lot of the locations were very much dialed back. There wasn't really, especially because we want to make sure that, the performances always shine through. And it's very easy to just kind of fill any kind of scene with random noises happening throughout the background. And so we try to stay kind of clear of doing that too much. If it felt that, and that's part of the whole idea of it feeling grounded. If it felt like it was too distracting, then it was just like, you know what, let's dial some of this back, and let's, like you said, let's let the silence and those quiet moments really, it really helps to. I love the silence of it, because for me it draws the audience member in. When it's quiet, you kind of have to lean in a little bit closer, and whether you're noticing it or not, you just lean in and listen a little bit more. So it's such a powerful tool to, it's very strange that in sound we're supposed to be putting sound in, but we love silence.
I think it's almost like, I keep saying the word off-putting, but like it is, like it makes you feel a little bit off kilter when something's just silent.
Mm-hmm.
You're just like, what is that? Like, what's going on? Especially in I think people got so used to movies being like early 2000s movies, felt like they were very oversaturated with sound and noises, and like now it feels like when you have that moment, you have to stop and you're like, wow, this, I don't know. It pulls me into the show in a way that like it's unexpected. You're not expecting to not have any kind of sound in those moments.
Yeah, and it's the one thing I loved about it was it gave us the ability to experience with what sounds can we put in there, so it doesn't feel complete silent. But there's still a little bit of life to it. But how do we not overcrowd everything? And I loved, Josh and Lindsay's home is a great example of, if you listen to it, it's almost never quiet. But
Okay.
there's, it's supposed to be out in the middle of Ojai. So you hear, you hear bugs, you hear different things kind of at night, especially like the nighttime scenes are fantastic, because, sound's always bleeding through, especially when they're in, Josh's ADU. That's supposed to be a little bit, the walls are a little bit thinner, there's not as much insulation with everything. So the sounds bleed through it's a little bit. And those are great because again, it's like what sounds will fit in right so that you almost don't notice it, and it feels natural to the environment, but it's not really quiet all the time. Yet it's not distracting to your ears. So it's always this like, the bullseye is always so small of like, how do we get this right? And that was one of the locations and building the ambience for them was a lot of fun, and trying to figure out what was going to work and what wasn't.
I love those moments too, because I feel like we all have ambient noise in our house that we forget about. But when you go to somebody else's house or somebody comes into your house and they hear it and you're like, oh, that's not even us. It's almost like, it's that ringing in the back of your ear that you're just not paying attention to, but it's always kind of there. And those moments are always kind of present, even if it's not like in your face about it.
Yeah, exactly. And there was also a lot of experimentation with trying to figure out what was going to fit right for that.
So looking back at your career, how do you feel like your approach to storytelling through sound has evolved?
That's a good question. So for me, the biggest change in approach has been a little bit of what we talked about with silence, is learning how to appreciate that. I think very early on in my career, I think in most sound editors' career, I started off cutting sound effects. So it was very much like, how do I put some cool sounds in here? And how do I, make sure that they get through? And, you kind of, again, you want to overcrowd the space, and you want to give it a bunch of, sounds for the sake of putting sounds in, just because, oh yeah, this is going to be cool and it's going to be super lush. And throughout my career, I've learned, especially, I love the process of what we do. And I love being able to sit down with a room full of, our like individuals and our mixers that we work with on the show, and sitting down with them and kind of discussing of what's going to work in these moments. And throughout my career, I've learned that a lot of it is trying to find the right sounds for the right moment, as opposed to just putting sounds for the sake of sounds. So it's being able to lean into the quieter aspects of it, and learning that just because maybe it's not a bunch of sounds that you automatically hear right away doesn't mean that it's, you're not doing your job. And actually being able to navigate the kind of plethora of sounds that are provided for us, of like, how do we navigate that and find what's appropriate for each project. And that's one of the biggest things that I've learned, is that every project is going to be different from one another. So what you did for the first, the show that you may have just finished up or the film you may have just finished up is going to be completely different from the next one you're going to be doing. So how do you approach that? And having discussions with creatives of like, how are we, what are your personal tastes? What are we looking for that we're trying to tell with these stories? Because every story is different, and there are times where we do put a bunch of sounds in a scene and it's like, yeah, this sounds great because it feels right for the context. So I think learning and being able to kind of decipher what every project needs has been probably one of the biggest things that I've learned throughout my career.
And that has to be very, rewarding to be able to do that. Be like, okay, let's look at this project by itself instead of being like the easy way of just like, we can put all these sounds and then it's fine, but you're trying to like tailor and make it special. You're trying to make it unique to whatever project's in front of you.
Absolutely. Because everybody's storytelling process is different. And every creative's, every showrunner that I've worked with, they're all different from one another and they all have specific visions. So it's sitting down and kind of figuring out, well, what's your kind of, vision for this? And especially I love getting to chat with showrunners and, directors because you kind of get, it gives you such a good insight to what every project needs and what they are all looking for. And because they all have very, like I said, they all have very specific process. And they all have they all approach sound in very different ways. So that's also like my favorite thing too, is figuring out what's your kind of approach to sound, what matters to you in any specific scene. Is it dialogue? Is it you're really wanting to hear all the dialogue and you're kind of the sound effects are just there to help fill out the space? Or do you really want to feel it, make it feel as lush and immersive as you want? So everything's different. There's no right or wrong way to approach it.
And that's really cool too, that you're able to talk with them and then be like, okay, this is what you're kind of looking for. And then go and achieve that through, like your own expertise, but also just putting your own kind of vision on like, here's what you're looking for. Here's how I would achieve it.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of, because there's oftentimes you run into creatives who are very much, they're like, I'm going to explain something to you, but I don't know the proper way to explain it. It's like, that's totally fine because there is no proper way to explain it. It's just, what is it, a feeling that you're going for? Is it, some creatives talk in colors. It's like, this feels blue. Okay, what's blue? What does that mean? How do I interpret that? And how do I take that and turn it into something that's, sonically tangible? And like, well, how does that translate to sound effects that I can relate to my, crew of editors that I work with? So that is very much, it's such a joy to be able to do that.
Well, thank you so much again for being here, Chris. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. And again, congratulations on your Emmy nomination. We're keeping our fingers crossed for you.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
So you can check out Beef Season 2 on Netflix. Until next time.